This is the story of a philosopher who set out to solve the very problems philosophy itself has created. A man who spent half his life satisfied with his work, saying, "That's it, I've answered almost every question," and the other half criticizing and questioning his own work, particularly on the most important, and perhaps the most underrated thing, language. The philosopher I'm talking about is Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the greatest intellectual minds. He was so influential that Bertrand Russell, another prominent philosopher, referred to him as a genius. Wittgenstein meant a lot to Russell. It was always him who was expected to carry on Russell's fundamental work in philosophical logic. It was as though Russell had crafted him for that very purpose. Anyway, let's talk about the philosophy of language here. I'll touch on his early work briefly. Although Wittgenstein himself was the harshest critic of his early work, it remains nothing short of a masterpiece. And of course, I'll discuss his later final work on language as well. I highly recommend you watch this video to the end. There is a yes or no. Anything that can be said can either be said clearly or not at all. This idea of Wittgenstein came to him during the Austro-Hungarian War, where he served as a volunteer soldier. Now imagine what a remarkable mind he had that, amidst the chaos of war, he still found solitude to write such a profound piece. Truly, wow. In his work, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, published in 1921, he raised three main points. The language is primarily used for presenting facts. Sentences were believed to acquire meaning through their pictorial representation of reality. Language was thought to possess a clear, formulaic, logical structure akin to calculus. Wittgenstein described language as being as complex as a living organism. He believed that what we can't understand is simply meaningless, and therefore we should not speak about it at all. Tractatus was an attempt to explore, mostly, philosophical problems by analyzing the logic of the language that these problems use. It questioned whether these problems truly mean anything, while also striving to devise a universal theory of language. This theory would apply to all problems expressed in language and address the limits of what language can do. Ludwig Wittgenstein was an inherently logical person. In Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, he introduced a representational theory of language, known as the picture theory of language. He argued that reality, or the world, is made up of a collection of facts that can be represented through language, as long as the language possesses the correct logical structure. He famously stated, "The world is the totality of facts, not of things," emphasizing that these facts are arranged within a logical framework. For Wittgenstein, the purpose of philosophy was to strip language down to its logical essence so it could accurately reflect the logical structure of reality. Wittgenstein's early ideas greatly influenced the logical positivists, a group of analytic philosophers focused on exposing unverifiable pseudo-statements and defining the boundaries of meaningful language. His declaration in the final passages of Tractatus, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent," encapsulated this approach, suggesting that true philosophers must learn restraint in language. Logical positivism became a dominant force in analytic philosophy. This perspective resonated with the Vienna Circle, a group of early 20th century thinkers. According to them, Wittgenstein argued that traditional philosophy is nonsense if it doesn't follow empirical verification or logical necessity. For Wittgenstein, philosophical problems are not real problems, like those in mathematics or science. They arise from linguistic confusion, and their resolution involves dissolving rather than solving them. By analyzing the roots of these confusions, philosophers can free themselves from the traps of language. His students, his staff, everyone was impressed by this man after the publication of his work. Perhaps this admiration and adoration led him to rethink his own theories. By the 1930s, Wittgenstein had concluded that the picture theory of language was fundamentally flawed. He spent the rest of his life explaining these shortcomings. He published a protest to express how dissatisfied he was with his earlier work, circulating some manuscripts as well. He remarked, "Resting on your laurels is as dangerous as resting in the snow. You fall asleep and die without knowing it," reflecting his constant drive to reassess his ideas rather than becoming complacent. Wittgenstein then wrote one of his most challenging works, where he took a complete U-turn. He shifted from viewing language as a logical necessity to seeing it as a practical contingency, which, in my view, is a far more insightful approach, one that helps us truly understand language, communication, miscommunication, and whatnot. Language as a game. Language is a labyrinth of paths. You approach from one side and know your way about. You approach the same place from another side and no longer know your way about. Ludwig Wittgenstein's later work, Philosophical Investigations, marked a dramatic U-turn. While in Tractatus, Wittgenstein viewed language as a picture of the world, where words correspond to facts in the world. Investigations radically redefines language. Wittgenstein suggests that language cannot be reduced to static descriptions or representations of the world. Instead, the essence of language lies in the dynamic interplay of words and actions. He introduced the concept of language games as a way to understand language. Rather than seeing words as pictures that represent the world, he proposed that words function within a variety of social practices or activities, each governed by its own rules. This shift led Wittgenstein to explore two critical questions. How is a word learned, and how is it used? According to Wittgenstein, the meaning of a word is not something fixed or inherent, but is shaped by its use in particular contexts. Take, for example, the commands camera, lights, action used by a film director. These words are not merely reflective of the world, they are part of a dynamic process. The director is directing a specific action. In the same way, the word brick in the context of construction functions not as a description of an object, but as an order to perform a specific task. Wittgenstein compared words to tools in a toolbox. Each tool has a distinct function, depending on the context in which it is used. Similarly, each word in a language has different uses based on the circumstances. In contrast to traditional views that focus on definitions or abstract representations, Wittgenstein argues that meaning is found in the way words are employed in language games. To understand what a word means, we should not ask for its definition, but inquire into how it is used in specific situations. For instance, we teach someone the meaning of a color by showing them physical samples of that color, allowing them to understand the word through direct experience. This practical learning of meaning through use is what makes communication possible. It's the same as when a child learns a word, for example, cat. He doesn't learn it by a dictionary, but by the use of this word by seeing the cat. Wittgenstein also draws attention to the difference between human understanding of concepts and non-human reactions to stimuli. For example, while a bull may charge at a red flag, it does not know the color red in the way humans do. Similarly, rats may react differently to red and blue lights, but they lack the conceptual understanding of these colors. Communication in humans relies on a shared agreement in reactions. Our understanding of color and language is shaped by a communal consensus on how we respond to these stimuli. The word bishop in chess refers not to the physical piece itself, but to a function within the rules of the game. The moves allowed by the bishop, as governed by the rules of chess, give the word its meaning. In this way, words are tied to the rules and practices of a given activity or context. Similarly, the word love in tennis has nothing to do with the emotion of love. It simply refers to the score of 0. The meaning of the word emerges from its role within the game, not from its emotional or conceptual content. Wittgenstein criticized philosophers like Plato and Socrates, who sought logical clarity and unambiguous definitions for concepts. For example, Plato might argue that a blurry photograph is not a true photograph because it fails to meet the criteria of what a photograph should be. Wittgenstein, however, would argue that the blurry image is still a photograph because the meaning of photograph derives from how the word is used within our practices, not from a fixed definition. The resolution of the photograph can be adjusted, showing that meaning is not static, but dynamic and context-dependent. The problem, according to Wittgenstein, lies in our unreasonable demands. For example, If someone asks you to stand in the corner, you don't need to ask for coordinates of that location. It's just the corner. It's common sense. Wittgenstein introduced the concept of family resemblances to explain how different instances of a category share overlapping features, commonalities, without possessing a single essence. Just as family members resemble each other in various ways, concepts within a category are linked by a network of similarities, not by a single defining characteristic. For example, the term game applies to a variety of activities, such as board games, card games, and ball games. Some games may involve competition, others may not. Some require physical skill, others may not. What unites them is not a common property, but a family resemblance. Similarly, Wittgenstein argues that there is no single feature that defines a book. Rather, books share a set of overlapping similarities that allow us to categorize them as such. Wittgenstein's concept of family resemblances challenges both realism and nominalism. Realists argue that there are objective properties or essences that define categories like games or books, while nominalists deny the existence of any shared properties between instances in a category. Wittgenstein offers a middle path. While he acknowledges that there is objective justification for using terms like game or book to refer to certain things, he rejects the need for a universal definition. The search for a single common property is misguided because meaning is inherently fluid and contextual. Anyways, while Philosophical Investigations is a wonderful work, it too has its problems. Firstly, it's incomplete, and there's no final nerve-ending answer to the meaning of everything. The human mind is still vast, thoughts are diverse and complex, but it seems that Investigations offers the closest explanation for how language is a broad concept through which we are constantly creating meaning by speaking either the same or through language games.